right? So you're the person who is responsible for creating access and opportunity for everyone on your team, right? And not everyone is situated the same way. And so as a leader, it's on you to understand where each person is and to meet them where they are. And if you find yourself inclined to only meet certain people where they are, then you need to interrogate that bias.
Welcome to Behind the Work, the show where we dive deep into the business, life, and careers of people doing some amazing things in the world. I'm your host, Jessica Santana, and I'm bringing you the stories behind the sexy and unsexy parts of success. So whether you're working at a company, building your business, or you're just trying to level up, this is for you. At Behind the Work, we believe that we all have to go up together, so make sure you're tapped in. Today, we have the great pleasure of talking with one of my great friends, Layla Ramirez. Layla is the founder and CEO of the FirstOnes Collective, where they cultivate and nurture the voices and dreams of first-generation professionals so that they can reach their potential. And as an experienced business leader, DEIB practitioner, and coach, her work has focused on building, scaling, and managing leadership development programs to address the needs of early, mid-career, and executive-level talent. Layla has held positions across a wide spectrum of organizations, including JustWorks, Amazon Web Services, and Netflix. Layla holds a BA degree in economics from Smith College and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Layla proudly identifies as an Afro-Latina with Dominican roots. She was born and raised in the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York City and spent her formative years in Boston, Massachusetts. She is both a first-generation college graduate and a first-generation business school graduate, and is the first in her family to start her career in corporate America. So, Layla, welcome to the Behind the Work show.
Oh my God, thanks, Jess. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. So let's just do some level setting because, I like to tell people that listen to the show how I met folks, right? Because everyone that I'm bringing on the show is super intentional. They're people that have not just impacted me professionally, but have such a near and dear space in my personal life. And so these are just conversations with friends. And so for those of you who don't know, I have officially now known Layla for the past 5 years. Her and I met when I was launching America on Tech in Los Angeles in 2019. And my co-founder connected me with her because she was cool with who is now her husband. She was cool with his fraternity brother. And I remember meeting Layla, and I remember being so happy about the connection because, as a first generation college graduate myself, as a first generation Latina who also got, her first dabs into, grad school, like I remember thinking like, there's not a lot of us, you know what I'm saying? And so it was an instant connection when I met Layla. And we've been homies ever since. Like I was a bridesmaid at her wedding, I met her bachelorette. And honestly, when I thought about the topic of first generation professionals, and I knew this was something I wanted to talk about because it's a topic that's near and dear to me, you were one of the first people, if not the first person that came to mind. And so what I want to do is start with your story, right? So can you share a little bit about your personal journey as a first generation professional and how that has shaped your career?
Yes, it'd be my pleasure. I should mention also, Jess, that this is so timely, and that you are a very, I think you're a significant part of like the inspiration story behind me, sort of like speaking out about what this experience is like. So I wanted to just say that up front because there's a book, right, that I started writing that's not done yet, but the inspiration story behind that book has to do with like a conversation that you and I had. So I just want to put that out there. And then in terms of my own story, so I do like to sort of like start off by saying like that personally, I am the daughter of immigrants from the Dominican Republic, and we were in New York, and then we moved to Boston. I should say that my parents are both the youngest of 12, and so that's a lot of people. That's a lot of cousins. That's a lot of aunts and uncles. And so I think of like my family as sort of like a microcosm of like the world, right, and the spaces and places that I occupy. And over the course of my career, I have had and been privy to multiple experiences at the same time. And so as a young person, trying to make sense of the world, it's like, well, these different experiences that are happening in my family, in my church, in the environments that I'm in, like cause me to question, right? Well, what makes me unique, or what are the things that I bring versus what are the things that other people bring? And there are certain aspects which we'll get into later on in terms of like the way that we operate, the way we see the world, what causes us to question, what causes us to engage or potentially disengage, that that come to the fore for me. But then, so that's like on the personal side. And then professionally, I graduated, I should say that going into undergrad, my one and only job was to get a job. Okay. That is very first gen professional-ish, right? And then with that being the sole purpose, there was not that there wasn't any room for like exploration or for like making mistakes, because I think I intentionally did give myself some rope to explore and to enjoy the experience. But I went to Smith College for undergrad, all women's college, intentionally. And I would say at the guidance of like many of the people whose advice I really appreciated in those younger years. And from there, studied econ, because I'm like, listen, what am I going to be able to turn into a job? Not easily, but with relative sort of like, what's more common, right? What skills can I like transfer? And so I was an econ major, started my career on Wall Street. And the thought really there is, coming from humble beginnings, like I got to figure out how to break the cycle of like poverty, right? How to have a better relationship with money, how to make money work for me. And so that was like the beginning of me really understanding that there's another world out there. Like, and there are other games being played, and you're either playing or you're being played, right? And so that was me on Wall Street. But like around year 2.5, I started like thinking, this is really all that there is going to be, is making myself wealthy, making other people wealthy. I'm not sure how I'm bringing the community along. I'm not really sure how I am satisfying a higher purpose. And so I quit Wall Street, really thinking that I wanted to get out there and find my passion, to do more of the things that I was doing as a volunteer in my professional life. And so I made a hard pivot into the social sector, which recently it became clear to me that that was the beginning. I got caught a bug. I was working at an organization where all of my peers were Black and brown like me, and where there were certain things about me that I didn't have to explain, certain conversations that like would never ever take place in the workplace when I was like on Wall Street, that were just commonplace, right? And the way that we built relationships and trust. And so that was sort of like where I caught the bug, and it's been like inclusion related work ever since in different capacities. So I left there, went to Harvard Business School for a couple of years, and then from there have taken on a number of different inclusion related roles at different tech companies. We can get into like the sizes and the cultures and all that fun stuff. They've all been very different. And the intention behind switching each time was very clear to me, and I'm happy to talk about that later. But that's really the journey. And now, I have my own coaching and consulting practice to really help people navigate their own dreams and to really get out there and be the best version of themselves.
Yes, for sure. One of the things that you talked about as soon as you jumped into telling your story was the importance of like your family and your community. And I'm curious because honestly, even me as a first generation professional, that was also my goal. Like when I went to college, I had one goal, and that was to leave college with a job. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether I studied abroad, whether I the president of an organization, whether or not I got to dabble in like self-exploration. Like these things for me felt like privileges, right? Like they were things that I could do if I had the time, but the main priority was like getting a job after school. So can you tell me like what is the climate that first generation professionals are often navigating that is informed by their family that leads them to certain career choices? And then how did those experiences or lack thereof experiences influence your path? Because it wasn't until you went to Wall Street and was like, oh, maybe this is not it for me, right? That you were like, I need to go and do things that I'm passionate about, that I feel called to do. And I think that for many of us that start our careers in corporate, but we have, these other passions that we don't oftentimes give ourselves the opportunity to explore. A lot of it is because of the circumstances that we grew up with, where we need to be making money forget about all of the ideas around like our passions. And
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about how your family experiences or lack thereof experiences informed your path.
Yeah, so I should say shout out to both my parents because in their own separate ways, they really sort of impressed a few things upon me, right? I'll say on my mom's side, it's the resourcefulness of knowing.
Mhm.
I cannot do it on my own. And there are resources, there are programs, there are people out there who, if you ask, they will help, right?
Okay.
So that's on my mom's side. On my dad's side, incredibly industrious, very entrepreneurial, and there's always an option. And if you don't have an option, you can create one, right?
Mhm.
And so I say that as context for starting going into my first job. I had already been plugged into a few programs. In this case, it was like inroads, and I was able to do a couple of different internships. Right, one in at a wealth management company, and another one at an investment management company in different locations. And so, having had the coach, the peer group, the roadmap, the playbook, right, to be able to navigate these spaces, recognizing that I was like ill-equipped from like because the academics of school don't get you there, right?
Mhm.
Being able to be effective in the workplace requires learning how to interact in the workplace and understanding the rules, both written and unwritten, in the workplace. And so I credit organizations like Inroads for giving me that inside, I would say the inside scoop on that and the polish, right, to be able to really hold my own in those spaces. And then on the side of like being able to sort of like navigate that transition and how important like the family element is in terms of your motivation, in terms of your drive. It is like, I think understanding that you have like an entire family that in some cases maybe depending on you to be the one that like made it or the
Mhm.
one who is doing new things. It makes you to a certain extent like bulletproof, right? It makes you resilient beyond measure, right? It makes you, I would say, even more competitive and more you have more resolve than maybe other people because
Mhm.
you just will not take no for an answer, right? Every
Mhm.
time you go home and you look at the faces of the people that are just like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you, or you can do it, and or they say like, I don't know what you're going through, but whatever it is, with God, you can get through it all.
Mhm.
It's like a little pep talk, and then it reminds you like, oh my God, like compared to the things that I've come from, this is nothing, right?
Mhm.
I got this. Let's keep going. And also, you learn to find the Jesses of the world, like the people who you can like really race with, who understand where you're coming from, and you just give each other like looks in the office place, and you just know it's like, hey, look, with a simple look, I can say to you like, yo, I see you, and I understand what you're going through. Keep going, right?
Mhm.
I'm here. You're here. We're gonna keep on being here. Let's get to it. And so yeah, so those are, I would say those are the few things, right? That network with Inroads. I'm still really close with some of the people that I started with. I'm actually, yeah, one of us, yeah. I'll be heading out to one of them's wedding.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
You
yeah.
know, it's interesting that you say that because I was also an Inroads kid, right? So,
Hey, okay,
shout out, yeah, shout out to Inroads. You know,
yeah,
through Inroads, I built a network of people that were like going through the same thing, and you know, and they actually really understood my story in a way that was very authentic.
mhm,
And I felt like because of Inroads, the network that I didn't have necessarily within my company, I was able to build it
yeah,
in my personal life, right?
mhm,
So I might not be able to hit someone up on the intranet like, "Hey, girl, you know, what are you thinking?" But I
yeah,
had the opportunity to text a friend that was maybe having an adjacent experience within their own companies to be able to be like, "Hey, like, how are you navigating this stuff?" Because I think that for first generation professionals, a lot of times is we don't know what we don't know, and if
mhm,
we don't have a resource to turn to for questions, it could actually be really difficult to
yeah,
navigate spaces and life alone, you know. So I'm really thankful for the Inroads program, and I
mhm,
don't think that it is circumstantial that you were a part of it as well.
yeah,
All right, so my next question for you is when you got into the world of Wall Street, right?
mhm,
And now you're here and you have basically achieved your dream of going to college and then securing your job. At
yeah,
what point were you like, you know what? I am not, you know, I'm making people wealthier, like you
mhm,
said. I'm making myself wealthier, but like this is this is not really reflective of the kind of career that I want to have. I want to be able to also bring people along with me. What were the things and the stories you were telling yourself at the time that allowed you to make the leap from the corporate sector to the social sector? And what did you have to tell yourself about money at that time around being a first generation
Mm,
professional that didn't scare you from making the opposite decision? Because I know there are a lot of people that do want to make those
mhm.
transitions, but they are a little bit afraid because they think they cannot live a good life or
Mm.
live a life that is up to par with the standards that they set for themselves if they made that transition.
Yeah, my mind goes to a few different things. First and foremost, like I consider myself very lucky. When I was working on Wall Street, I was living at my grandmother's house, and I am the poster child for like delaying gratification. So
Mhm,
I didn't have to like pay an astronomical amount of rent, and my grandmother and I, we used to just like kick it, so I didn't have to be outside. We had a great time, right? Watching the telenovelas from 7 to 10, and then the news from 10 to 11. It was great.
mhm,
And then, so that's one thing, right? So I was able to sort of like accumulate what I call a go to hell fund, right? This is the safety net that most people that like come from privileged backgrounds have mom and dad, they have credit cards, they have loans that they can, apply for or whatever to like get them through like a 6 month or 1 year period where they're like, you know what, work isn't working for me, or I'm in a toxic relationship with work and I need to get out of here. I had to get myself some runway. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that as I am trying to figure out, what I want to do, I'm living two different realities at the same time. I'm living in Washington Heights.
mhm,
I'm asleep on the subway, 6 a.m. trying to get to the office every day, right?
mhm,
And when I wake up on the subway, right, at my stop at work, which is at World Financial Center,
mhm,
all the way downtown by where Ground Zero was, and it was still under construction at the time. Every single step from the subway to the office was like a step into a different world, right? Pristine offices, furniture, artwork, trees, like just a completely different context, right? And so that was the reminder that I had that like, although this is a different place and a different world over here, when I leave here, I'm going back to something that's more familiar, but it's very different.
mhm,
People
mhm,
are not, there's not even space. People like actually like live on top of each other, which I should say I'm not trying to knock Washington Heights because I love Washington Heights. And I love it exactly the way that it is. I'm
mhm,
just pointing out that there's a distinction there, right? So that kept me humble. That kept me very focused and very
mhm,
determined. And then the last piece that I'll mention is that um, I never stopped spending time volunteering. I was a very active and engaged mentor at an organization called I Mentor, very active at an organization called Bottom Line, which is, how I got to Smith College. And I spent a lot of time really working with like the folks that were on the boards of these organizations to continue to broaden access and opportunity for people that look like me and that were coming from environments like mine. Um, I don't know how many years later, 15 years later, I'm still in touch with my mentee, and she was like at my wedding also, right? Like I hold on to people in these ways, and that is what keeps me grounded. That's what keeps me focused, and also gives me the perspective to say, even though I can keep on doing this, is this really, like, when I look back on my life, is this really what it's all going to be about? Like you learned the market, you learned how to, make yourself and other people wealthy. But like, who did you help? Who did you bring along? Right. That's a question that really matters to me, and that's really motivating. And I think you're able to bring your family along because they are in proximate distance to you, and they can come along in terms of like being at all your events and really getting that exposure. But like, you have to really be intentional in terms of like opening the doors for other people and being the voice for people that maybe sometimes are voiceless, right?
mhm.
Don't know how to raise their voices. And so that's really what's top of mind for me as I was like transitioning. That first transition was a beast.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I imagine it was also scary. Like I remember when I had my career in management
Mhm.
consulting, I was making money that I at one point in time thought would be a dream. You know what I'm saying? And then when I took the leap into entrepreneurship, I was like, how do I even explain this to
Mhm.
my family? Like there were so many fears, and
Mhm.
I remember telling my mom and dad, like, hey, I decided to leave my job. They
Yeah.
were like, and where are you going to come back here? And I was like,
So
maybe. was like, maybe, I don't know yet. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah.
I also remember there was a sense of alignment and alleviation
Mm,
that I
yeah.
felt. And while I was scared to, leave my job and to make that transition from corporate to entrepreneurship, I knew that there were going to be so many people that I helped along the way. And that was the thing that brought me a lot of joy during that time. But when I think about my mindset, I was like, what are the things that are causing these kinds of fears
Mhm.
to really surface during this time of transition? And how can I tell myself a different story about the opportunity rather than the thing that is the access barrier? And
Yeah.
so the question that I have for you is, you have been doing work with first generation college students, professionals for a long time. If you had to name what those barriers are that they face, that for folks that might not fully understand that experience but want to be able to help these kinds of individuals, what are those barriers? And then in tandem, what are the things that people can be doing to help support their transition?
I appreciate this question, and I think we've talked about a few of them already. I think one of the most critical sort of like barriers. So maybe I'll name a few of them, and then we can go into the ones that maybe feel the most interesting. But I would say that one of the biggest challenges is like not knowing what you don't know, right? Which is something that you mentioned already, and that is as it relates to the spaces that you're in, the things you're expected to know, the things you're expected to bring, the ways you're expected to engage, and in some cases, even those mindsets and those stories that you're expected to really sort of like tell yourself, right? So that's one huge bucket of things, right? Another huge bucket of things is there are I would say conflicting expectations, right? And conflicting cultures, right? If you want to put those things together, when you are, I like to think of being from a Dominican background, we have a much more collectivist
Mhm,
mindset around how we move. And
mhm,
so relationships matter, your word matters, trust matters, and your ability to really come through on anything that you commit to is critically important. And so we're very intentional and thoughtful about what we're committing to and what we're doing and what we're saying, because we recognize that like this, you build and lose trust in those small moments.
mhm,
Now, when you think about like the corporate environment and the American culture in general, it's a lot more individualistic, right?
mhm,
And if you can't, I use this phrase when I'm coaching people. I'm like, if you can't name it, you can't tame it, right?
mhm,
Let's name it so you can tame it. But like, imagine yourself at like, I don't know, 20, trying to figure out like, I know that this feels different. I really don't have the language. I can't really put my hands on it. It's difficult to have a direct and very intentional conversation about what's going on when you lack the language, right? So I think that limits our ability to connect. And then not
mhm,
being able to connect means, well, who are the people that you're racing with, right? Who are the people that you're on this journey with? Like being able to authentically connect when part of you feels like it's not really either welcomed or understood or even seen, makes it difficult for you to really bring more of yourself to like the experience into the work. And so I think that those cultural clashes and those different expectations, depending on the context that you're in, is a second big bucket. And then the last bucket that I'll mention is really one of like from a mindset standpoint, right?
mhm,
Depending on when you are, like, how you're raised and what attitudes and beliefs are about like what your role in a family, in a society, in an organization. Depending on what you've seen and what you've been told, you
mhm,
might limit yourself. You might have limiting beliefs. You might tell yourself stories that keep you from playing big, that keep you from asking the question, that keep you from demanding what you deserve, right?
mhm,
And that keep you from thinking of yourself as someone who is different, which is not the same as less than, right? And so when people talk about the first gen professional narratives that there are,
mhm,
it's one often of like deficiency. People need help. They don't know this. They don't know that. And it's
mhm,
not that like I mean, people need help, right? And we do need help. But it's not one of these. It's not like we're less than. It's not like
mhm,
we're just different, right? And how we show up is different, and the help that we need is different, right? Not unlike the people who might grow up in a lot of privilege, and the help that they need is maybe to emote more and to express themselves because they don't come with the Latin flair
mhm,
that we have, which helps us when we're talking about being authentic and really expressing intentionally and thoughtfully your feelings and emotions. So anyway, those are sort of like three buckets of things. We can go anywhere you want to go with that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you explained it really, really well in that I think it's, folks are navigating what don't I know, folks are navigating the conflicting expectations, and then folks are also navigating what it looks like to be in spaces that don't always understand them. And they are devaluing the culture or the mindset or the character of these people just because there was an unspoken expectation of how they should operate. That if you go back to the first barrier, how were they supposed to know if this is not the culture that they grew up in? And so the question that I have for you is, let's say that I'm a listener and I'm the head of a department, or I'm leading a business, or I'm leading a team. What would you say are the things that I should be taking into consideration at the leadership level to make an environment more conducive for first generation professionals to thrive? Because I do believe that in a world where work gets really busy, some of these things absolutely get lost in translation, and folks don't focus enough on people's humanity in the workplace because they're so focused on outputs and deliverables that a lot of times first generation professionals, they are on the receiving end of this backlash for things that they didn't even know was expected of them. So if I am a manager and I am the lead of a department, or I'm leading a team of some sort, what are the things that I can be doing as a leader to make an environment more conducive for first generation professionals to thrive?
Yeah, so I love this question, and we can go so many different directions. So I'll be brief here, right? And we can sort of like expand as needed. But first, I think of a leader who models inclusion, right? And that's everything from like varying who's managing the meeting, who's setting the agenda, who speaks first, who's allowed to ask questions. So really being intentional. The leader should think of themselves as the architect of the team. And so if you want there to be a sound foundation, if you want people to really connect and know one another, then you need to create opportunities intentionally, which sometimes feels like going slow to go fast. But your role as a leader in valuing getting to know people personally goes a long way, because the more, and then also you sharing your personal experiences to the degree that feels comfortable, that allows other people the permission and the right to do the same thing, right? And it says to them, it signals, hey, we care about more than just what you have to contribute from a work standpoint here. Bring more of yourself, right? That's one thing. Another thing is think of yourself as it's as the playmaker, right? So you're the person who is responsible for creating access and opportunity for everyone on your team, right? And not everyone is situated the same way. And so as a leader, it's on you to understand where each person is and to meet them where they are. And if you find yourself inclined to only meet certain people where they are, then you need to interrogate that bias. You need to interrogate that affinity, right? Which could come from like, maybe this person reminds you of you when you were younger. Wonderful, right? What would it take and what would it look like for you to have a relationship that's just as generative with someone who doesn't remind you as much of yourself? So there's that sort of like intentional sort of connection piece, and like and I like to say like playmaking piece, right? But then there's this thought, or this idea that, like, we all have really great intentions, right? And I have to remind the leaders that I work with, like, intentions are great, but they're not good enough. They're not sufficient. So we need to build systems. We need to, not unlike how we like create a strategy to achieve a particular outcome with a business, we need to develop systems and structures that are promoting a diverse set of folks on a team, right? So are you being democratic and fair and equitable about who you are assigning stretch projects to, right? Are you being fair and equitable in terms of like who you're spending that one-on-one time, carving out the 30 minutes every quarter to talk about, okay, this is where you are in your career, but like, how are we going to get you to the next step, right? And then there's this real point around, not everyone knows what their destination is career-wise because they don't have access or they don't have exposure. And so there's a role that you as a leader can play to say, you know what, I see that you're really great when we're in meetings and you really captivate the audience. You should consider doing more of these presentations. And perhaps you have a career in, I don't know, something on a stage. I don't know. It could be as a trainer. It could be as like an executive, an executive who's, you know, essentially sharing strategy and all kinds of important company updates. But you as a leader, you're in a different situation. You're in a different seat, and so you can bring some of those really critical talents to the forefront for people and invest as a I would say as a partner with them, and be the sponsor, be the mentor and the coach, if you will. But you also have to like do your work, because there's a part of being able to do all these things that requires you to know who you are, where you requires you to locate yourself in terms of like how you're able to navigate or mitigate situations where there might be bias, and then to be able to like make conscious choices, right? So rather than make the comfortable choice, it's what's the choice that the future Layla is going to be thankful for, or what's the choice that the future Jess is going to be thankful for. And I mean, it's really be a servant, right, as a leader to the folks that are really depending on you.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of servant leadership, because I think a lot of times when we think about servant leadership, we think that it is just about charity, like that it is just that on the weekends and
Mm,
after work, I go and I sit on a board, or I go and I donate money every year. And I'm like, actually, servant leadership is about the everyday action
mhm,
that you choose to make that make you a profound person in the universe. It has
mhm.
very little to do with how much money you give to a philanthropy, or how much money you disseminate to a charitable organization. It's about checking in with people, making sure that you're seeing people as their full selves and creating conditions for them to authentically be themselves in a world that oftentimes is not designed for them to thrive. And so I really appreciate you mentioning that. One of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier on was around, first generation professionals, and how sometimes their cultures or the ways in which they're socialized in the world, they are seen as less than. And
Mhm.
I actually will say, as a first generation professional, first generation entrepreneur, like, you want to see me in leadership because I'm gritty, I hustle, I know that I don't know everything, so I'm going to go and find it out. And so the question that I have for you is, if you were talking to people who have the decision making power to promote a first generation professional into a senior leadership role, what is the business case for you to be able to make the reasons as to what characteristics this person possesses that actually sets them apart from other people, even if they don't fit the cultural norm of what leadership looks like?
Okay. Let's get into it. Such a
Yes, let's get into it.
so first and foremost, I'll start with like inclusive leadership, right?
Mhm,
Inclusively, like you're not gonna have a more inclusive person than someone who has to navigate multiple identities at the same time.
mhm,
And that leads me to the next point: humility. Someone who is humble is able to understand that like putting the needs of someone else
mhm.
doesn't mean taking away from themselves, right? It just means that you're just as considerate and thoughtful, and that you're leaving space for what you humbly understand is stuff that you don't know, right? So you can't operate with a level of just I would say decisiveness and like and what's the word? I mean, it comes across sometimes as like just being unyielding, right? You don't operate that way because you recognize that like for a whole world that I'm familiar with, there's a whole other world that I'm not. And so I have to humble myself to the reality that there's things that I just don't know. And so that leads to my next point, which is you won't find people that create a more inclusive team, a more diverse team, than people who recognize that I need the people who are experts at each one of the factors that contribute to success in whatever line of work that I'm doing. I need an expert at each one of them. And because I know that I can't be the expert at all of them, then what that means is that when you look at my team, and even when I look at your network, Jess, or when I look at mine, right, they're not all people that look like us. And people would be surprised. They would be surprised to see, the diversity of the network, right? The skill sets that are represented, the wide spectrum of different, like, I would say, socioeconomic statuses and different variations of like access and opportunity, right? And that's not like by mistake, right? It's because different experiences and different opportunities require different skill sets and different knowledge and different relationships, which leads to my next point, which is these are, first gen professionals are people who have what I like to call, well, the psychological term is like cognitive flexibility. When you have to operate in two different worlds at the same time and be equally as effective, right? You have to be able to, or you are able to lead with a version of yourself that's going to be most effective in this environment, because you know that that is what's required, right? And then you're going to go to another environment and it's not like you're compromising yourself. You understand that you are making not that you're making adjustments so that you can be effective, right? And there's a difference, right? We talk about this sometimes depending on the situation. There's a difference between being right and being effective, right? So as I think first gen professionals are incredibly attuned to when it's much more important to be effective, and you can be right and you can be effective, right? And sometimes you keep the right to you, but you be the effective person, right? And so these are 4 concrete ways where it's kind of like when you think of the next sort of like the next generation of leadership that's going to get us from this point to the next. I think it's us, right? I think it's first gen professionals, because you see a lot about like, companies wanting inclusive leaders. They want people who can operate in multiple contexts, who are incredibly adaptable. I mean, how do you live in 2 worlds and you're not adaptable? Doesn't work, right? So these are, when I look at the definition of people who are inclusive leaders, I think first gen, like, it's synonymous. First gen in the professional context as well.
Yes, I love that you said that, because you spoke so much life into the valuable assets that first generation professionals actually do bring into the workplace, regardless of whether or not, we didn't know the tricks of the trade that we should have added someone as optional to a calendar invite. When we think about what it looks like to create inclusive spaces, this is who we are, and we live it and we breathe it, because it has been socialized since we were children. It is the family dynamics that we grew up in. And so for those listeners that are first generation professionals and they're really trying to build their confidence around knowing that they might be different and they might not look like leadership now, what are the tips and strategies and maybe tricks that you would provide them to let them know that, one, they are going to be okay, and that they are deserving to be in these spaces, so that they can build the confidence to know that they are just as valuable as anyone else?
Yeah. So, I mean, wow. So I'll say first and foremost, you belong right where you are, period. I have controversial thoughts about imposter syndrome, which we could get into another day, but like, I don't think the imposter syndrome is real, right? Every decision, every sacrifice that you and your family had to make for you to be where you are. There's no reason why you should feel anything other than, let me take up the space that I rightfully earned, right? So, and then the next thing that I'll mention is that you have an opportunity to change the way that people think about first gen professionals with every interaction that you have. So bring your A game, right? And also, sometimes bring your A game requires a lot of effort and energy. So take care of yourself. Self-care is how we get through it. Self-care is how we do it. So, and then that leads to like my next thought, which is when you think about the journey that is ahead of you, right? There are the Laylas and the Jesses and many more other people. Like we are holding the door open for you, right? And we are ready to sort of like be the light, right? And be the calm in the storm, right? So reach out. We're gonna be reaching back out, and we're always, available and happy to support. But just I think if nothing else, like, you're deserving of everything that you have, so much more, and things that you can't even imagine. You just have to really put yourself in position to be able to reap those benefits. And I mean, it starts with, I think the battle to win that, winning that battle starts in the mind, right? So just commit to yourself that this is what you want to do, and then the rest, the universe conspires to get you where you need to go.
Yes, I completely agree with that. One of the things that I want to make sure that we hit on is this idea of mastering the mind
Mm.
in order for you to master yourself and master your excellence in a world where we're living in times where there's a lot of noise around us. There's
Yes.
ongoing political shifts, there are ongoing changes in the workplace, there are ongoing things happening within our families, outside of our families, our communities. What do you think are the things that first generation professionals, outside of just taking care of ourselves, what do you think are the things that we can be doing to make sure that regardless of what is going on around us, we still thrive and
Mhm.
maybe make this more actionable? Because I hear a lot as a first generation professional, take care of yourself, make sure that take care of your mental health. But
Mhm.
what that actually look like in action? Because the one thing I have always appreciated about you, Layla, is that you're gonna take care of yourself. Like, if there is anyone in the world that is about self-preservation,
Listen.
it's Layla Ramirez. And so
Mhm.
tell me, what does that look like in action? What are the things that people do to take care of themselves during times where there's so much noise?
Yeah. There are, so it's not going to look the same for everybody. So I'll speak to the things that I do. So first, I think that, as someone who is God fearing, I spend a lot of time grounded in like the word, right? So I spend time going to church, even in moments where I'm just kind of like, I don't really know if I need to do this, because I find that the way that I think and the energy that I have on the other side, it just something shifts, right? Being in that space. So that's the first and foremost for me. Then there is recognizing that because you can do something doesn't mean that you should or will do something. And
Mhm,
so really having a distinction there and really recognizing that there's a different, that you have a conscious choice that you can make about what you commit to, that's really critically important, right? Then I think about, as it relates to like relating to like the people from the different worlds that we sort of like all sort of like bring together as first gen professionals. Give yourself grace, right? Know that people in both contexts, at home, the more success you make, sort of like in the corporate world, the more distance you're gonna feel in some cases from your family members and the experiences that you grew up with, right? And then
mhm,
the closer you get in terms of like success, or the further away you get from your family and the closer you get to success, the more distance you feel from like some of these really privileged environments and these spaces where it feels like there's a completely different set of rules that people operate by. And that's okay, right? That's okay. There are many other people that are navigating a similar journey, which brings me to my next point, is like find your people, right? And I
mhm,
think that there's, and sometimes you're not going to find the person who understands exactly, like you're not going to find a first gen professional, but you'll find someone who is who has demonstrated resilience, who has demonstrated resolve, who is able to really uh, reframe things that are happening in a way to take the power back and to not be a victim of circumstance. I think that's really important. And then the last thing that I'll say is like, y'all, sleep is important.
mhm,
Sleep, sleep. Your mind needs sleep. So rest and recharge, because we we have multiple, I would say multiple types of struggles that are going on at the same time. And
mhm.
the one, and like I said earlier, right, um, many of those struggles, like the different, like winning or losing, like it's just it's a difference of a mindset, right? And then the last piece that I'll leave you with is, I often, when I'm thinking about what is required of me in a moment where I might be tired, I ask myself, what is the future Layla gonna thank me for in this moment?
Mhm.
So it's having a foot in the future and a foot in the present, and just being unapologetic about like, this is where I'm at right now, and that's okay. That's all right.
Yeah, I love that. I love the point that you made around rest being part of the resistance. I think that people don't realize that your sleep hygiene is so important
Mhm.
for longevity. Like if you are trying to like burn yourself out, if you're not in it to win it, then you won't sleep. But anyone
Yes.
that is smart will know that you have to rest. You have to rest, especially as first generation professionals. We're getting pressures from everywhere.
That's
And
right.
so my next question for you is around your book. So you've been working on a book that
Mhm.
focused on telling the first generation professional experience. And so, can you please let us know a little bit about the book, some of the findings that you've already kind of been able to explore or been able to
Yeah.
surface in that process? And what can we expect as readers of the book once it actually drops?
Yes. So this has been a project for quite some time. Thank you for raising this, Jess. What I will say is that through the process of writing the book, or continuing to write the book, I have made connections with incredible human beings, including you, Jess. Right? People who have illuminated a path that is less traveled, right? A path that is is really often not really spoken about. And so some of the things that we're talking about today are things that will be sort of like featured in the book. But really, it's the purpose really is to just honor our stories and to honor our journeys. And so what I want to come from this book is a platform for people to identify, or at least to meet a number of different individuals who identify as first-gen professionals, and to hear from them the survival tips, essentially, that help them to navigate certain experiences. And because I know that everyone is not going to identify with just me, I'm like, well, here's a whole entire menu of experiences, and take from it whatever resonates, and whatever doesn't, go ahead and pass it on to the next person who you may have a conversation with. So part of the thought behind this book is to illuminate what I mentioned earlier, this idea that like the narrative has historically been that there's like some sort of like deficiency, when really we have a competitive advantage, right? When we think about what we need to get us to the next phase of growth, the next phase of prosperity in this country and beyond. Then there's also the piece around like who you're being as you're navigating this journey, and finding community and inspiration in the experiences of other people. And then there's a part of it which is really just almost like, I hesitate to say it's like a pep talk, but it's really just like an affirmation, right? For the people who are reading the book who are first gen professionals, it's like, you are worthy, you're exceptional, you're great, you are deserving, right? And it's just me sort of like pouring into first gen professionals and reminding them, not unlike, grandma would do or your mom would do, right? When you get that pep talk when you were going out to school to do something that you've never done, that no one's ever done before. Not unlike that, right? So it's a place where people can come back to feel centered and to feel reflected, respected, expected, understood, right? And then the last piece is really a purpose around continuing to open this dialogue for folks who claim to be allies and folks who claim to want to support, who want to dismantle some of these barriers and to address some of these systemic inequities, that this is the role that you can play. Like wherever you see that there's like a professor or a teacher who did a certain thing, that's speaking directly to you, right? Wherever you see that there was like a church leader or a political leader who navigated this particular tough decision and opened this door, that's speaking directly to you. And then as I think about like, those that are in leadership, right? Anytime that you see that there's someone who invited that person into a room that they otherwise weren't supposed to be in, right? Or who brought them aside and let them learn from over their shoulder, that's modeling for you what your role is in this journey for first gen professionals. And so there's going to be something in there for everybody.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so, Layla, I think what you're hinting at is the counter narrative, right? Like the counter narrative, the story that people are not saying. And so, as we close this out, right, what do you hope the narrative around first generation professionals goes from, in terms of what it looks like now versus what you want people to say about first generation professionals that are entering the workforce or that are advancing in the workforce? Like, what is the paradigm shift that has to happen from a mental standpoint in order for the story to go from, oh, these people, they know nothing, they are so hard to coach, to, oh, actually, if you actually center all of the things that make them beautiful, these are the kinds of people we do want in leadership in the workplace.
I think what has to happen, I mean, where I want the narrative to go is, like I said, from a place of these folks need help or they're deficient in some way, to these folks are like, they bring something unique, different, and valuable. And they just operate differently, and different is not less than, right?
Mhm.
Well, that awareness, like that shift, is really what's required. But you need to want to see value in things in order to be able to appreciate the value in them, right?
Mhm.
Someone doesn't tell you that a diamond is valuable, you would just look at it and be like, oh, it's glass,
Yes.
right? So that's just, you know, a little cute analogy there. And so that's the mindset shift that I would like to see. And then as I think about, you know, what is important for them to keep in mind, it's really that in order, if we want something we've never had before, this is not my quote, this is, you know, someone who I'm not sure who I should quote for that, but if you want something you've never had before, you have to do something you've never done before.
Yeah.
And I think that extends to innovating, it extends to problem solving, it extends to finding new frontiers and new markets, it extends to like creating teams of people that are with a composition that that has never been seen before, right? Because historically, you know, teams have been male and white, or they've been, you know, some sort of like variation of white with like maybe one or two folks that are of color, right? And so this is the idea that like, hey, you can't achieve the outcome, a different outcome, using the same set of tricks or the same tactics. And
Mhm.
so let's jump into an environment where more is possible, where we see value in different places, and where we just become very great. We become we become experts at valuing things that are of value. And we're
Mhm.
not making judgments as to like what their relative value is. It's really just about, do you have something of value to bring? Great. Let's challenge ourselves to include it and to nurture it and to harness the power that it brings to do something that we've never done before, right? So that's really what I would like to see, is people thinking of first gen professionals as game changers, as people that are going to be like the X factor in terms of like high performing teams, or new innovations, or access to markets that, you know, a company doesn't have an access to, or to really bring along a constituency of people that, you know, maybe you've never been able to like connect with or to really talk to before, and see where that goes. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know what, Layla? I just want to say thank you so much for blessing us with so much information today. Thanks for generously dropping gems on us. This personally for me has been such an amazing conversation because it is who I am. And there were so many times where I felt that as a first generation professional, I was not navigating these spaces appropriately. And it started making me feel like I was less than. And I think it took a while for me to be like, actually, the things that make me different are actually the things that make me pop in. And
That's right.
for all of you all who are first generation professionals that are listening to this, just know that you matter, that you are cared for, that you are loved. And despite what the world around you might be telling you about who you are, you should know that you've been divinely created and that in and of itself is valuable. And so,
Mhm.
Layla, for those that want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to connect with me. I check that fairly regularly. I don't think I'm active on any other platforms. I also have like my website, firstonescollective.com. You can go there, and I also have a LinkedIn page for First One Collective as well. Let me think. That's it. That's really it for me.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Work. Leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. Until the next one.
Thanks for having me, Jess. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Work. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Follow us on YouTube and on social media. I want to hear how this show is leaving an impact on you.